There is a particular kind of silence that falls over a room when power reveals itself, not the silence of emptiness, not the silence of nothing being said, but the silence of everything, every assumption, every smirk, every casual dismissal, collapsing all at once under the weight of a truth that was always there, waiting. San Francisco International Airport, Private Aviation Terminal. A Tuesday morning in October, when the bay fog was still sitting low and thick over the water, and the city had not yet decided what kind of day it wanted to be. A woman walks into that terminal, 41 years old, charcoal suit, natural hair like a crown that cost her nothing and said everything. 7 people behind her, each one carrying the kind of quiet confidence that comes from working alongside someone they believe in completely. She is the CEO of a company worth $2 billion. She is about to board an aircraft for the most important meeting of her professional life, and the crew of that aircraft is about to make the single most catastrophic mistake of their careers, not because of what they said to her, but because of what they didn't say, what they didn't see, what they chose in those 34 minutes between her arrival and the moment a phone rang in that terminal to completely ignore. They did not know who she was. They did not know they were already working for her. And by the time that plane was supposed to leave the ground, not one of them would still have a job. This is the story of Zephyrine Caldwell-Osai, a woman who built an empire in silence, survived disrespect with stillness, and delivered justice without raising her voice above a conversation. Stay with this story, because the ending is not what you think it is. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Let's slow this down, because before we get to that terminal, before we get to the phone call that stopped everything, we need to understand what was at stake, not just professionally, not just financially, but personally, humanly, in that deep, marrow-level place where ambition and identity and exhaustion all live together. What does it feel like to walk into a room carrying $2 billion worth of decisions on your back and have the person standing in front of you look right through you? What does it feel like when the people who are supposed to serve you serve everyone around you instead, as though you are furniture? And what does it feel like to know something they don't know? Something that, the moment it surfaces, will rewrite every single interaction that came before it. There are questions this story asks that go beyond Zephyrine, beyond San Francisco, beyond aviation. What do we do with power when we have it and others can't see it? Do we announce ourselves, or do we let the truth arrive on its own schedule? What is the difference between justice and revenge, and does it matter when the wound is real? And perhaps the deepest question of all, when you have every right to bring down a hammer, what does it say about you if you choose not to? These are not easy questions. Zephyrine did not find easy answers. But what she found, what she chose, in a private terminal on a foggy Tuesday morning in October, is the kind of thing that people talk about for years. Her chief financial officer, a woman named Solange Farrow, would later say that she had worked alongside Zephyrine for 9 years and had never fully understood the weight her CEO carried until that morning. Prescott Langham, the COO who had immediately redirected Calder Whitmore's misplaced attention back to Zephyrine, would later describe the following 30 minutes as watching someone absorb a blow that would have broken most people and turn it into architecture. But before we can understand what Zephyrine built from that moment, we need to understand what it took to get her into that terminal in the first place. Because Zephyrine Caldwell-Osai's story did not begin with a billion-dollar acquisition. It began with something much smaller, much harder, and much more honest than that. It began with a girl from Bakersfield who was told, more times than she could count, that certain rooms were not built for people like her. Bakersfield, California sits in the southern end of the San Joaquin Valley, where the Central Valley heat is unforgiving, and the landscape stretches flat and serious in every direction. It is a city of working people, oil workers, farmers, teachers, mechanics, people who understand that the earth does not give you anything for free. Celestine Caldwell taught 3rd grade for 27 years at a public elementary school on the east side of Bakersfield. She was the kind of teacher whose students came back to visit her decades after they had left her classroom, because she had a gift for making a child feel that their mind was a country worth exploring. She gave that same gift to her daughter. Devlin Ose worked at a mechanic shop 6 days a week and picked up weekend shifts at a hardware distribution warehouse when the bills required it. He was a quiet man, not because he had nothing to say, but because he had learned early that the world sometimes listened more carefully when you said less. He passed that lesson to his daughter, too. Zephyrine grew up watching her parents work, not suffer work. There is a difference, and she understood it. They were not broken by their labor. They were shaped by it. And what they shaped her into was something the guidance counselor at her high school failed completely to recognize. When Zephyrine was 16, she told her school counselor that she wanted to study business and eventually run a company. The counselor, a well-meaning woman named Mrs. Tallworth who had spent 30 years watching potential walk out the door, looked at Zephyrine's file, looked at the economic bracket that file placed her in, and said with genuine kindness and total blindness, "Have you thought about going into teaching like your mother? It's a very stable career." Zephyrine was polite. She thanked Mrs. Tallworth for her time. She walked out of that office, drove home in her father's truck, and applied to 8 university summer business programs that same evening. She got into 4. By the time she was applying to Stanford for her MBA, she had already completed an undergraduate degree in supply chain management from UC Davis, worked 3 years in logistics at a mid-size freight company, and developed a proprietary software prototype on a second-hand laptop that she built in the evenings after her shifts ended. The software was designed to predict and resolve bottlenecks in private aviation logistics, the invisible machinery that made charter flights run on time, that routed maintenance crews, that managed the cascading dependencies of fuel, personnel, weather, and regulation that most passengers never thought about because everything worked. When it didn't work, when the machine broke down, when a private flight was delayed or grounded because of a gap in the logistics chain, it cost companies extraordinary amounts of money and reputation. Zephyrine's software closed those gaps. It learned from the data, adapted to the variables, and in simulation runs it cut operational delays by 31%. She called it ArcLight, because she liked the idea of something that illuminated the dark spaces in a system, the places where things quietly fell apart before anyone noticed. She founded ArcLight Solutions at 34 with a co-founder named Tobias Venn, a software engineer she had met during her MBA program who understood code the way she understood systems. Tobias was methodical, precise, and brilliant in the way that people who think entirely in logic tend to be. He was also, it would emerge 3 years into the company's growth, deeply uncomfortable with the speed at which Zephyrine wanted to scale. This created the first real fracture in ArcLight's foundation. Not a public one, not a dramatic one, but the kind of quiet structural crack that, left unaddressed, becomes the place a building eventually breaks. Tobias believed in building slowly, carefully, in controlled iterations. Zephyrine believed in moving with urgency, in capturing markets while the window was open, in betting on the strength of the technology before a competitor could replicate it. They were both right. And they were both, in the way that two people who are both right can sometimes be, completely incompatible. By year 3, Tobias Venn had sold his stake in ArcLight and departed with a settlement agreement and a non-disclosure clause. The split was civil. It was also, for Zephyrine, one of the loneliest professional moments of her life. She had built the company with someone. She now had to carry it alone. She did not complain about this. She did not discuss it publicly. She poured the grief of it because it was a grief, losing a working partnership, into the company itself. She hired slowly and carefully, building a senior team that she treated less like employees and more like the kind of collaborators she had always believed a company needed at its core. Prescott Langham came on as COO in year 4. He had an operational mind that complemented Zephyrine's visionary one, and he was the rare kind of number 2 who genuinely did not want to be number 1. Solange Farrow, the CFO, had an almost supernatural ability to see the future of a balance sheet, to read the financial weather of a deal, and know when to move and when to wait. She had turned down offers from 3 larger companies to join ArcLight because she said she had never in her career met a founder who thought the way Zephyrin thought. Together, this team had built ArcLight from a promising startup into an industry force. And 6 weeks before that October morning at SFO, they had completed the most consequential acquisition in the company's history, Meridian Apex Airways. The deal had been structured through a subsidiary for reasons both strategic and personal. Strategic, because announcing a technology logistics company acquiring a private airline would generate market speculation that could destabilize the share price of both entities before the synergies could be demonstrated. Personal, because Zephyrin had learned, a long time ago, the value of letting people reveal themselves before they knew who they were dealing with. She had not announced the acquisition yet. She had not told the crew of Meridian Apex who their new owner was. She had simply, on a Tuesday morning in October, arrived at the private terminal at SFO and waited to see what would happen. What happened was exactly what she had, somewhere in the quiet country of her experience, expected it might. The private aviation terminal at SFO is a world apart from the main concourse. There are no long lines, no overhead announcements, no strangers pressed together in the democracy of economy class. It is a curated space, leather seating, subdued lighting, the kind of quiet that costs money to engineer. It is a space that is supposed to communicate one thing above all others. You belong here. Zephyrin and her team arrived at 7:14 a.m. for an 8:30 departure. The crew of Flight MA-117, Captain Rowan Ashford, co-pilot Stellan Drace, lead attendant Calder Whitmore, and junior cabin crew members Petra Hollins and Damon Strike, were already aboard the aircraft and in the terminal conducting their pre-departure procedures. The first interaction was so subtle that 3 members of Zephyrin's team later said they weren't sure, in the moment, whether they had imagined it. Calder Whitmore approached the group near the check-in desk. He scanned the 8 faces in front of him, 8 executives in business attire, carrying laptop bags and document folders, arranged around their CEO in the way that a team naturally arranges itself around the person at its center. The body language was clear. Anyone paying attention would have read it immediately. Calder Whitmore was not paying attention. Or he was, and he was reading something else, something that had nothing to do with body language and everything to do with the assumptions he carried into work with him each morning like a second uniform. He looked at Prescott Langham and said, "Good morning. I'm Calder Whitmore, lead attendant for your flight today. If I could just walk you through a few details for our departure." Prescott didn't hesitate. He turned to Zephyrin and said, "All of that should go to Dr. Caldwell Osai. She's our CEO." Calder's smile did not change. His eyes moved to Zephyrin. He nodded the nod of someone adjusting course without acknowledging they had been off course and said, "Of course, my apologies." Then he handed the departure itinerary to Prescott. It was the kind of move that was almost imperceptible. The verbal acknowledgement and the physical action split apart. The words said one thing, the hands did another. Zephyrin took the itinerary from Prescott's hand, read it in 11 seconds, set it on the desk, and asked Calder a direct question about the revised flight path over the Sierra Nevada that the itinerary noted. Calder answered the question while making eye contact with a point approximately 6 inches to the left of Zephyrin's face. Solange Farrow, standing 2 feet away, noticed. She said nothing. She looked at her CEO to gauge the temperature. Zephyrin's face was composed. Her voice was level. Her eyes were clear. She asked a follow-up question. Calder answered it. The interaction ended and he moved away. The next 22 minutes were a slow accumulation of the same thing in different forms. When pre-flight refreshments were offered, Calder moved through the team and asked for each person's preference. He reached Zephyrin, and in a moment so brief it could be explained away as distraction, as oversight, as simply the accident of a busy morning, moved to the next person without asking her. Zephyrin requested sparkling water. Calder said, "Of course," and brought her flat. When Captain Ashford came into the terminal to greet the passengers, a courtesy, not a requirement, he shook hands with each member of the team. He reached Zephyrine, shook her hand with the automatic efficiency of a man processing a line, said, "Morning," and then turned to Prescott and said, "You all set for today?" "Big meeting," Prescott said. "You'd want to ask her that." Ashford looked at Zephyrine as though seeing her for the first time. "Right," he said. "Long flight to New York. We'll take good care of you." Then he walked back toward the aircraft. Zephyrine watched him go. She had a choice in that moment. She had, in fact, been making a version of that choice every few minutes since she walked through the door. And she was making it the same way each time, with stillness, with observation, and with the particular patience of someone who knows that the ground is already moving beneath the people who are standing on it. At 7:52 a.m. her phone rang. The caller was Renata Voss, the lead attorney managing the Meridian Apex acquisition on behalf of ArcLight's legal team. The regulatory review had concluded. The paperwork was cleared. The acquisition was now fully, legally, and publicly ratifiable. Renata's voice on the phone was precise and professionally warm. "Zephyrine, we're clear to move. Everything has been ratified as of this morning. Meridian Apex is yours to manage as you see fit, effective immediately. I'll have the official documentation to you within the hour," Zephyrine said. "Thank you, Renata." She ended the call. She sat with that information for 6 seconds. The terminal hummed around her. Calder Whitmore was across the room reviewing documents. Damon Strike was carrying a tray back toward the aircraft. Captain Ashford was visible through the glass, walking the tarmac. Then Zephyrine looked at Prescott and said, 4 words in the voice she used for decisions. "Get me Marcus Fell." Marcus Fell was the chairman of Meridian Apex Airways, or he had been until this morning. If this story has your heart racing, drop a comment that says, "I'm still watching." Let's see who's following along all the way to the end. Marcus Fell had been building Meridian Apex for 22 years. He was 63 years old, silver-haired, and deeply proud of what his company had become, a boutique aviation brand with a reputation that had taken 2 decades to polish. He had not sold the company because it was failing. He had sold it because Zephyrines' offer had been the right number at the right time, and because the terms of the acquisition, a quiet transition, a managed public rollout, no immediate upheaval in staff or operations had felt, when they signed it, like a respectful handover. When his phone rang that morning and he saw it was Zephyrines' direct line, he answered with the easy confidence of a man who believed the hard part was behind him. "Zephyrine, congratulations on the clearance." "How are things looking on your end?" she told him. She told him where she was. She told him what terminal she was standing in. And she told him in the clear, factual, entirely undramatized way that she told people most things, exactly what had occurred in the past 38 minutes. There was a silence on Marcus Fell's end of the line that lasted a full 4 seconds. Then he said, "Tell me you're joking." "Not." Another silence. When Marcus spoke again, his voice had changed into something older and more tired. "Zephyrine, I don't have words. I am so deeply." "Marcus," she said, "I don't need the apology right now. I need you to tell me what kind of men these are. Ashford, Whitmore. Are they typical of the culture or are they exceptions to it?" This was the question. This was the one that revealed everything. Not who did what, but whether it was weather or climate. Whether these were isolated behaviors or the expression of something woven into the fabric of the company she now owned. Marcus was quiet for too long. "That's your answer," Zephyrine said. She thanked him and ended the call. She sat back in her chair. Outside the terminal glass, the aircraft sat on the tarmac, its engines not yet running, its cabin being prepared by the same crew that had spent the last 40 minutes deciding, in 100 small ways, who mattered and who didn't. Solange Farrow came and sat beside her. She had been watching from across the room and had understood enough of the one-sided phone conversation to know the shape of what was happening. "What are you thinking?" Solange asked. Zephyrine looked at the aircraft. "I'm thinking about what Marcus just told me without meaning to." She paused. "And I'm thinking about what my father used to say." Her father, Devlin Osai, had a saying he used when Zephyrine was young and had come home from school burning with the particular anger of having been made to feel small by someone who had no right to make her feel anything at all. He would sit across from her at the kitchen table and he would say, "The way a person treats you is information. Receive it carefully. Then decide what you want to do with it. Receive it carefully. Then decide. She had been receiving it for 38 minutes. Now it was time to decide. What followed involved 3 phone calls, 2 emails sent by Solange from her tablet, and a conversation between Zephyrine and Meridian Apex's head of human resources, a woman named Gretchen Harlow, who had been with the company for 11 years, and who answered the call from an unknown number on a Tuesday morning, with the faint wariness of someone about to receive bad news. Gretchen Harlow did not know that the woman on the other end of the call was her new employer. She found out in the first 90 seconds of the conversation. The subsequent silence was the sound of a person recalibrating everything they thought they knew about the morning they were having. MS. Harlow, Zephyrine said, I need you to listen carefully because I'm only going to explain this once, and then I'm going to need you to move very quickly. Gretchen Harlow listened. She moved quickly. Meanwhile, in the terminal, Calder Whitmore was reviewing the boarding sequence, and Petra Hollins was arranging the cabin with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it hundreds of times. Captain Ashford was in the cockpit running pre-flight checks. Stellan Drace was reviewing weather data for the crossing. None of them knew that the ground beneath their careers had already disappeared. The information moved faster than they did. By the time the boarding call should have been issued, 3 things had happened simultaneously. First, the Human Resources Department of Meridian Apex had been notified by the new majority owner that a formal conduct review was being initiated for all crew members assigned to Flight MA-117 Meridian Apex's legal counsel had been contacted by ArcLight's legal team and informed that the acquisition was now fully effective, that the new ownership was exercising its rights under the management clause of the acquisition agreement, and that no aircraft under the Meridian Apex fleet was to be departed until further notice from executive leadership. Third, a representative of the San Francisco International Airport Private Aviation Operations Center received a call from ArcLight Solutions informing them that Flight MA-117's departure would be delayed pending a review. The aircraft did not move, and in the terminal at 8:24 a.m., 6 minutes before the scheduled departure, as the fog was just beginning to lift off the bay, Calder Whitmore's phone buzzed in his pocket. He looked at the notification. His face changed. He looked up. He looked at Zephyrine Caldwellos, who was sitting in a leather chair with a cup of sparkling water, the sparkling kind she had originally requested, and a folder of documents open across her knees. She did not look up from the folder. The full understanding of what was happening did not arrive for the crew all at once. It came in stages, the way water comes through a crack in a wall, first a dampness, then a seep, then a pour. Calder Whitmore received the notification on his company device first. It was from Meridian Apex's HR department. It told him that a conduct review had been initiated. It told him that the flight was delayed. It asked him to remain in the terminal. He stood very still for a moment, the phone in his hand, reading the words again. Then he looked at the woman in the leather chair. The woman who had arrived with 7 colleagues and a quiet authority that he had spent the last 48 minutes navigating around. He walked toward her. His voice, when he spoke, had lost the smooth managerial tone it had carried all morning. What was underneath it was plainer and more afraid. "Ms. I'm sorry, I want to clarify, are you Dr. Caldwellos?" she said. She looked up from the folder. Her voice was the same as it had been all morning. "Yes." He opened his mouth. He closed it. "Why don't you sit down?" she said, not unkindly. Captain Ashford came in from the jetway at almost the same moment, having received his own notification, a message from operations that was terser and more final. His face as he entered the terminal was the face of a man who had believed himself to be in a very particular kind of story and had just been handed evidence that he was in a completely different one. He looked at Zephyrine. He did not need to ask. The pieces had assembled themselves in his mind during the walk from the cockpit. "Captain Ashford," Zephyrine said. "Please sit down." He sat. Stellan Drace came in 30 seconds later. Then Petra Hollins. Then Damon Strike. They filtered into the terminal one by one, each with a company device notification in hand, each arriving at the same slow realization, each landing in the chairs that Zephyrine team had quietly rearranged into a loose circle around the one she occupied. Prescott Langham stood to one side, arms folded, expression neutral. Solange Farrow had her tablet out and was documenting the time. Zephyrine let them settle. She let the silence sit. Not as punishment, though she had earned the right to use it as one, but because she understood the value of letting a moment breathe before you spoke into it. Then she set down the folder and said, 6 weeks ago, Arclight Solutions completed the acquisition of a 67% controlling stake in Meridian Apex Airways. As of this morning, that acquisition has been fully ratified and is legally effective. I am your majority owner. No one spoke. I want to tell you what that means for this morning, and then I want to tell you what it means going forward. Those are two different conversations. She looked at each of them in turn. Calder Whitmore was looking at his hands. Captain Ashford was looking at her, directly, finally, in a way he had not managed in the preceding 48 minutes. This morning, Zephyrine said, each of you made a series of choices about how to treat a passenger. Those choices were not random. They followed a pattern that I have, over the course of my career, learned to recognize very well. And I want you to understand, I am not going to pretend that I don't know what that pattern was or where it came from. She paused. I am also not going to tell you that what you did was the worst thing that has ever been done to me. It was not. I have survived worse, from people with more power and more to lose. What you did this morning was ordinary. And that is, in some ways, more troubling than extraordinary cruelty, because ordinary is what repeats. Ordinary is what becomes culture. Captain Ashford's jaw moved. He said quietly, Dr. Caldwellos, I owe you. You don't owe me an apology right now, she said. I want to tell you what I've decided, and then you can decide how you feel about it, she explained. The conduct review was real. It would be thorough. It would be conducted by Meridian Apex's HR department under the oversight of Arclight's newly appointed transition team. Each crew member would have the opportunity to be heard. The outcome of that review, whether anyone's employment was terminated, placed under probation, or subject to remediation, would be determined by the evidence, not by Zephyrine's personal preferences. What Zephyrine had done was not fire them. What she had done was build the structure that would allow the facts to speak. I could have made this decision alone, she said. I have the authority to do that, but authority used carelessly is just power, and I did not spend 16 years building something to reduce it to that. Calder Whitmore looked up from his hands. His eyes were red at the edges. Why, he began and then stopped. Why what? Zephyrine asked. Why didn't you just? He couldn't finish it. Something earlier, she offered. He nodded. Because, Zephyrine said, I needed to know what you were when you didn't think it mattered. Anyone can behave well when they know who's watching. Terminal was so quiet that the distant sound of a plane taxiing on the far runway came through the glass like a held breath finally released. Calder Whitmore nodded. Just once. Slowly. The conduct review, when it concluded 3 weeks later, resulted in the termination of Captain Rowan Ashford and Calder Whitmore, whose histories with the company revealed that this was not an isolated pattern. Gretchen Harlow had, in her own words, not been surprised. Stellan Drace received a formal written warning. Petra Hollins and Damon Strike were found to have been following the lead of senior crew and were placed in a mandatory cultural competency program. Meridian Apex Airways, under its new ownership, restructured its hearing protocols, its crew training, and its senior leadership. Flight MA-117 departed that afternoon, 4 hours late, with a substitute crew. Zephyrine and her team arrived in New York in time for a dinner meeting. The merger negotiation concluded successfully the following day. There is a word that Zephyrine Caldwellos used in an interview some months after the story became public, after someone in the terminal had talked, and the story had moved through industry circles and eventually into the broader conversation about power and identity, and what it means to belong in the rooms we have built for ourselves. The word was architecture, she said. People ask me why I didn't announce myself the moment I walked in. Why I didn't say immediately, I own this company, you work for me, adjust your behavior. And the answer is that I wasn't interested in performance. I was interested in information. Anyone can perform when the stakes are visible. I wanted to see the structure, the actual architecture of how these people thought, how they moved through the world, what they assumed and what they discarded. Because I was about to invest in that culture, I needed to know what I was actually buying. She paused in that interview in the way that she paused in conversations, with intention, not absence. And then, when I had the information, when the acquisition was ratified and I had the legal standing to act, I chose not to act alone. I chose to build something, because the point was never to hurt anyone. The point was to fix something that was broken. Interviewer asked her if it had been hard. If the 48 minutes in that terminal with all of its accumulated small cruelties had cost her something. Yes, she said. She did not elaborate, but Solange Farrow, speaking separately, said this. I watched her that morning. I watched her absorb every single one of those moments without flinching, without performing anger, without making them a story she was inside of. She was watching it from the outside, even while it was happening to her. And that kind of discipline, that kind of emotional architecture, is the loneliest thing I have ever witnessed, because it means you can't afford to fall apart until it's over. Os passed away when Zephyrine was 37 years old, 2 years before Arclight reached its first billion in valuation. He never knew what his daughter built. But the mechanic who worked double shifts and said few words and believed in the value of receiving information carefully before deciding what to do with it, he had already built the most important part. There is a version of this story in which Zephyrine Caldwell Osai walks into that terminal and announces herself, in which no one gets the chance to reveal who they are in the dark, in which the whole thing is resolved in 3 minutes and everyone goes home with their assumptions intact. That version is tidier. It is also smaller. The version that actually happened, in which she sat quietly, observed carefully, built deliberately, and chose justice over performance, is the version that changed a company, ended careers that needed ending, preserved careers that deserved preserving, and left something better than the silence it found. Not every insult deserves your urgency. Some deserve your patience. Not every room that ignores you is worth your anger. Some are worth your plan. And not every person who fails to see you is your enemy. Some of them are just employees. Some of them are yours. Take a moment with this story. Think about what Zephyrine chose in that terminal, when the easier thing, the more immediately satisfying thing, was available to her. She could have announced herself in minute 1. She could have let every single person in that room feel the full weight of their mistake the moment she had the legal authority to drop it on them. She didn't. She built instead. So here is the question this story leaves with you. What would you have done? That terminal, with that phone call, with that authority, would you have announced yourself immediately? Or would you have waited, watched, and chosen the slower, harder, more deliberate kind of justice? There is no wrong answer. But the answer you give says something about you. Something worth thinking about. And if you have ever been in a room where people looked through you, where your worth was invisible to the people who should have seen it, this story is for you. Because Zephyrine did not wait for anyone to hand her the room. She bought the building. And if you think this story was extraordinary, if you think a woman sitting quietly in a leather chair while the ground shifted beneath everyone around her is as remarkable as storytelling gets, wait until you hear our next story. Because the world is full of people who moved through impossible moments with impossible grace. And we are not done finding them. Subscribe, so you are here when the next one arrives.